Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lalantia Show. Today I'm really excited because I have a guest, and it has been a while since I have had a guest on. At the beginning of the year, when I channeled for the year, I was told that this year is so much about community. So I'm excited to have Isabel on today, and I'm going to share a little bit about her, introduce her here so that you guys can learn about her. So, Isabel Hunt is a visionary and catalyst for global change through her work as a sociologist. So, my goodness, why is that word so hard to say? Sociologist, multiple award winning filmmaker of the film The Power of Connection, successful inspirational speaker, author of her book The Power of Faith Driven Success, healer, and thought leader. For more than a decade, Isabel has studied various facets of human connection and explored the emotions and conflicting messages that come with labels, unconscious bias, social programming, and false identities. Due to her unique gift of synesthesia, did I say that right?
Yes.
Which allows her to see everything in color. Isabel sees the world as a beautiful dance that evokes compassion and sincere love for humanity. Her focus is on shattering cultural barriers and engaging in cultural transformation globally through aspects of emotional and self awareness. So, I wanted to have Isabel on today because she has this amazing film that I had the pleasure of watching a few months ago, and it was so good. So it's about the power of connection, and I watched it with my kids, and it was just a great conversation starter. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about the inspiration for it and the process that you went through in creating that?
Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. My camera is still a little weird, so I'm trying not to get too close. Otherwise, I'm just glowing like I just drank something. Um, but anyway, so yes, yeah, we're really, really excited to work on the film, The Power of Connection. The subtitle is Change the World by Changing Your Perception. And we started the project in 2019. And 2019 was kind of that year for me where I just wanted to quit as an entrepreneur. I didn't want to do anything anymore. I just was tired of the normal way we're supposed to do business. Keeping up all the systems, you have to show up every day, email list, all of that. I just couldn't keep up. And even though I had people working for me, it just didn't feel good anymore. So I was like, I'm getting really bored, like just talking about things, or even just listening to people talking about that kind of topic, like emotional intelligence. Like everyone suddenly jumped on emotional intelligence. Everyone was, educated in it, well, whatever that means, or an expert. And it was just talk. It was just talk, and I couldn't really connect to anything what people said. And I said to my husband that I'm really passionate, especially with younger people, because they seem to get it. Like they ask questions, they have the conversation, they question it, but they also listen. At least that was my experience, or is my experience with most of them. So one night I was actually crying, and I was like, okay, I don't want to do this business anymore, but I don't know what else to do. And I don't just want to be mom. I just can't do that. And my son is now 7, so he is in school too. So, just sitting at home and cleaning house is not exactly my thing. Um, and so I watched a documentary by Kyle Cease, and it was just really inspiring because it was so simple yet so profound. And he said, sometimes you just have to do the simplest things that make the biggest impact. And so my husband came to bed as well, and he's like, well, you have so much material. Why don't you do a documentary? Like, why don't you just do something simple as filming people downtown and doing like that gazing exercise that we did in the film? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not a producer. I don't know really how to do a film. But then the next morning, I did my meditation, and suddenly I could literally hear it in my mind. I'm like, no, you're supposed to do a film, because I just think in pictures. I think everything in analogies and metaphors and picture, and how people can envision something that otherwise may seem, not really tangible. And so I started to see this entire script coming up for me. And within a week, I posted something on Facebook and I was like, well, I don't know, I have this crazy idea, but I have no budget and I have no clue how to do any of that. But, if you know of anyone who is into videography and, editing or script, let me know. So I turned around, literally, someone said, I know someone who might be able to help you with, filming this whole thing. We got together for coffee and he says, oh, I just asked God to give me some, passion projects, something that is not for the money, but something that I can really stand behind. And that's important for me. And so he totally said yes right away. Incredible. I mean, he has experience for 30 years and award winning as well. And his friend came on board as well for some of the scenes. He's also an award winning videographer. So that was wonderful. And then I spoke at an event, and one person who was attending the event, he came around and said, oh, I need you to connect you to a certain person, which was Emily on our team. And we started talking. We weren't even talking about the film, but I was just like, hey, I have this cool film idea. And I didn't know what she was doing. She's like, I wrote scripts. Did you know that? I'm like, no, I did not. I'm like, well, if you need help with, changing your script up a little bit and making it more into film, I'd be more than happy to help. So she cut those 10 pages into 5, and we were able to dense it down to the most important parts of things and keep it to an hour, which was important for me because of, attention span. And things just came around. We had then editors that said they would love to help. And one of them, Erin, right?
Yeah.
Erin, yeah. Um, she's close to finishing up school for editing, and she's just phenomenal. And she jumped on board, got it done rather quickly. We couldn't film everything the way we wanted it and how I saw it in my head because of COVID that then happened, and things got pushed out a little bit. We actually wanted it to be done the beginning of 2020. Now looking back, I'm like, well, actually it was perfect timing to have it done the beginning of 2021, because now people are tired enough to actually listen to that kind of message. Like, give me something. And then we finished it up, and I just, submitted it to some film festivals. And I thought, well, if we can just launch it with one award, that would be great, just to get the credibility, since I'm not, into filmmaking per se. It's not my main occupation. And then it just went and rolled from there. We're at 8 awards now and 1 finalist position, and it just keeps going. And we have directors reaching out and saying, hey, would you be interested? We looked at what you shared, and we would love to have you be part of that. So summer is usually a little low. With film festivals slower, and then fall usually picks up again. And so I'm sure there's still more coming, but those 8 were never even expected. Like, I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? I didn't expect that to happen, because I thought it was just, part of my business that I was supposed to do, and whatever happens with it is what happens with it. So we were able to keep it on low budget, and it was totally still very professional. I listened to myself a couple thousand times probably working on this. So at this point I needed a break. I couldn't listen to myself anymore. But even I look at my son, he's 7, and he watched it. He loves watching it, mostly because he's in it. So he just loves that. But he also picks up on things, and he teaches that his friends. And it was an amazing opportunity. And with that, and now I have more ideas for short film, like one short film that I would love to work on for this year if I can figure out the budget around it. But it's about struggleholism, how we find our identity in struggle, our worthiness, and how much we struggle. And I did a really awesome talk around that, where I created like an AA meeting around struggleholism. And I want to turn that into a short film, or even just that we're going through our own adoption journey right now, in particular focusing a film on trauma within the adoption world. So all those, crazy creative ideas now suddenly coming to me, and I'm like, where were they all of the last 10 years? So now I just feel like, oh, I need to do all this stuff, or get to do all this stuff. And so that's kind of how it came together.
Yeah, it's like the doors kind of opened for you in this part of your
Yeah,
path and your purposes here. So that's amazing, and congratulations on all of the awards.
thank you.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it was pretty good. It felt pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. It feels good.
Yeah. Well,
Especially internationally. So it's kind of like, oh yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I remember like as they started to come in, like it seemed like every day you were saying, like, oh, and there's another award and there's
Yeah.
another award. And it's fantastic. I think it's amazing. I also think that, you said that you started or were inspired in 2019 and started then. And you know what 2020 was, and the fact that you were inspired before we actually experienced 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And 2020 taught us all about like being alone and needing connection with more people,
Yeah.
and being able to be with community. What 2020 taught me is, I've had intentions for what I'm creating for myself. And what in 2020 it came clear to me that it's not just for myself and what I'm creating, it is for a community, to have a community of people
Yeah.
that create something amazing together, where we see, like, I know for me, I've watched different things on communities and how they work together and the struggles that they face, because everybody is so different and everybody has different opinions of how things should run. And
Right.
it does seem like it having a community of different people, because everybody's so unique, would be a struggle, but at the same time, like, that connection. And so it's like learning to live in community again, because we haven't for so long.
No, not at all. And I think 2020 made that very, very clear that even though we thought we were living in community or we have a lot of friends or whatever, in reality, it was not the case. We were just living next to each other. But we never actually lived in community for a very, very long time. Because you saw, as soon as things went down and regulations were up and people, you have to do this, and if you don't, then I'm not safe and you're not safe, and whatever the narrative is, right? But suddenly neighbors turned to each other, turned against each other, friends turned against each other. People suddenly felt the need to be in that position to tell you what you should do and the other way around. And that's when you realized you never really had the community, that what we should understand about community, it was always about convenience, of just someone to talk to, someone who is there when you do need some coffee or eggs or whatever, or it was just more so the luxury of having people around you, the convenience, than actual community.
And I think that we are so used to struggle. You talked about
Yeah.
struggleism. Is that how you said it?
Struggleholism. Yeah.
So we're so used to living in struggle. Like, we create so much struggle for ourselves, when actually if we live in community, we can support each other. Somebody's sick, somebody else makes dinner. When I'm sick, I'm telling my kids, hey, you figure out dinner for yourself, because I'm not getting out of this chair. That supporting each other, that's a very simple example of, supporting each other. And I know for me in 2020, I didn't see any of my friends,
Mhm.
but I did make friends with my next door neighbor. And so we would go to each other's houses and just sit together and talk for hours and hours. And I didn't know her. Like, before, I didn't know her at all. She knocked at
Interesting.
my door and delivered fresh baked cookies. And we just became friends from there. She doesn't live
Yeah.
next door anymore, unfortunately. But I did actually get to kind of experience having support through 2020 in a way that was totally unexpected to me. And I
Yeah.
currently live in an apartment complex. And while it felt like the world was going through some kind of apocalypse, because you go walking and there'd be like no cars on the road and the parking lot's empty, and it's like, what is this place? But living in an apartment complex, I would still see people, and it would kind of remind me that I'm not actually all alone in the world. And that actually helped me a lot. And I think that's what kind of led me to see that what I want to create is a community. Not that I want to just invite anybody. I want it to
Yeah.
be, the people in my community are people that, I resonate with, and we already have a friendship and established and stuff beforehand. But I do think that having community and learning to connect again is really important, and that collectively we need to learn how to connect with other people.
Yeah.
And we don't really know how to do that anymore.
No, see, for me, it was the opposite experience with 2020. We, my husband and I, we're the ones who grow the food, and if we have too much, we go and give it to the neighbors. And even like some of the neighbors across, I'm like, we never had that happen with any of our neighbors wherever we lived. Like nobody was actually giving us stuff, or we had honeybees. And so we shared some of the honey because we had a lot until they killed them with all their pesticides. But, we were usually the ones who check in with the older neighbors, but suddenly with COVID, we weren't allowed anymore. My son wasn't allowed to play with the neighbor kids because it's too dangerous, and they knew that we are more like this holistic lifestyle, so they assumed that, well, that's what we would do, and we wouldn't really, operate like everyone is supposed to.
Yeah.
And my son still went to school. He goes to Montessori school, which we absolutely love. And for him, it wasn't much of a difference except for like a 2 months period where nobody really was allowed to leave the house pretty much. But other than that, it was more of a distance suddenly between neighbors that once were close. It's almost like people were watching each other to do something wrong.
Oh, wow.
Like neighbors were calling the police on others because they had too many people in their backyard, and that was not allowed. And we live in the city, so it's a little different too, right? So that really drove me into um sorry, I think you hear my son.
Barely. You can barely hear. It's okay.
He has his bedtime. So for me, there was this push suddenly to find people that are more like-minded because I didn't no longer have that physically around me. And that's where I got to connect with communities online with like-minded people and create something incredible to the point where it almost felt like you have them sitting next to you. I mean, that's how we connected too. And you just feel like, well, we were friends the whole time. I don't know what you're talking about. Like we've known each other for years, but
I
even
know.
though it's been just a few months, right? But that just showed me also the opportunity of community. And that also shows me that when we talk about community, it does not depend on if we create something physical where we have to like physically see each other, but we can create that same experience in an online space because if you look at it from an energetic perspective, there's no difference. There is no difference. If everything is energy, then we are as much connected through Zoom here now than if we were to sit next to each other, right? I would just smell what kind of perfume you have on you, which I don't now, or what shampoo you use. But it doesn't matter in the way we can and are able to connect on a soul level. And that is what we have forgotten. And most people really rely on that physical connection, and if they don't have that, they fall into depression instead of really taking a look at what is it that connects us and learn more about the quantum and metaphysical understanding of how we are truly connected. Because that's and I'm more of an extrovert, but over the last like 10 years I really balanced out between intro and extrovert, and I am absolutely fine with just being by myself, because especially when I meditate, I feel this complete oneness. It's almost like you're melting into your environment and you don't feel alone. You suddenly have conversations with the trees, with the bunnies outside, with the grass, with the bees, with my dog, like those kind of things. You are never alone. And that's when we have to look at what is next for humanity in terms of communities. I mean, we see that there are more and more self-sustainable communities that rise up, that want to be created, more and more people that say, hey, I want to buy off some land so that we can have a small community to work and live together. But before that even happens, we have to take a look at what actually connects us, what is essential to having a community work within the physical space. with a spiritual understanding. And that is the big question, and the big balance figuring out, and it's almost like an experiment in what needs to happen to make this really successful.
I agree with that. And, that's one thing. I had started my Facebook group, Source versus Circle, like quite a few years ago now. And it has always been like, I called it circles. So we all come together like around the fire, we have a circle. Everybody is equal. We all have something to contribute. And that was something that was always really important to me, is to have it as a place where we can really be vulnerable and safe with each other. But we're online, so it's
Yeah.
not like we don't see the worst necessarily. We can for sure, but we're not together all of the time. But it gave me an opportunity to really connect with people in that space, and then connecting with you in other spaces that were even more intimate, smaller spaces of communities. In that, I learned that it gets trickier in those smaller spaces with only a few people communicating on a regular basis, and the differences that really popped up. And it's really interesting to observe how everybody reacts in those spaces.
Yeah, and for me as a sociologist, that was just the most beautiful thing to do, to sit back and observe, but also observe what is being reflected back to me. Like I am, and I admit it, I can tend to be a little bit more rigid. Like when I see something that works, I'm like, okay, why can't you guys just do this? Or let's do this, let's move. And that's something, the biggest thing that has communities collapse is self-responsibility and self-awareness. um, I just had that happen today within a conversation. Someone was triggered, someone responded triggered, and suddenly I'm like, well, I'm out of here. Like this kind of mindset where I'm like, well, if you were to actually sit down and understand why did this just trigger me and be honest with yourself, like radical self-honesty is lacking. And that's where literally communities fail. We had experiences where, even spiritual communities where a lot of people suddenly did some spiritual bypassing and used that as an excuse not to show up, or to show up in a way that that kind of disrupted the energy of the whole. But then again, use that as an excuse. But this is how I live. This is how what I do, and this is just and then everyone needs to accept that. Where there's a give and take, just like we do the giving and the receiving, and most people just and we haven't learned that really yet, and I'm not perfect at that either. So for me, it was perfect for me to reflect on that for myself, and how can I be more in the flow and let go of that rigid mindset and how I think things should work out. I'm very controlled. I love to have control, and that's probably a mom thing too. And also then I'm highly sensitive. You don't have much control of much. I mean, even though that's not quite true, if you're really aware, you have pretty much control of everything around you and how you choose to respond to it, right? And how you choose to have your vibration so that your vibration matches whatever is around you. So we do have that power. But in the moment, I was not really aware. Like I was operating from how I would operate with my friends. And that's more of that rigid mindset. So there was a lot of reflection for me. But man, I mean, I've seen people operating from different nationalities, different countries, different backgrounds, different demographics, different races, like just a different history, loaded with different historical traumas, with different generational traumas. I mean, there was so much that suddenly shows up within those communities. So even if we were to take something like that from an online space into a physical space, where you're physically present as well, where you can't just turn off your computer and say, all right, I'm done with you for tonight. We have to become aware of things like that. So I think true community only comes through real healing and radical self-honesty with ourselves, without, getting attached to what other people think, without taking things personally, without making assumptions, just really being radically honest, being willing to say, I'm sorry, I overreacted, I was triggered. this is what I would like to do moving forward. And most of us are still sitting within that space of, I have to protect my identity. So anything that doesn't align with me, that goes against that, I will attack. It's like, when your body attacks anything that is foreign to your body. Sometimes it even is the good. Like if you have an autoimmune illness, for example, your body is attacking anything that's not familiar with, even though it's actually not bad.
Yeah.
And that's what we have been trained to do. We are responding to everything and everyone, even though they're not actually bad for us, or they're not, threatening us, but our programming experienced anything that's not like us as a threat. And that's something we have to overcome. And I think with 2020 and even 2021, and I think we will have to learn a lot more lessons, because I think some people didn't quite pick up on some lessons in 2020. um, we will have to really get to a point where we're so physically broken, like where it's almost like where we have to get to a point where physically we can no longer do anything, so that we have to focus on the spiritual side of things. It If we don't get there, we eventually will be forced to get there.
Yeah, that is a good point. And I do agree. There's still a lot of people who, well, we don't want to get honest with ourselves. We don't want to see these things, right? But we do.
Yeah.
We don't, but we do. It's like we want to move past it all so that everything can be in harmony and, all the stuff. But it's really hard to look at our own stuff. So we avoid it and we'll distract ourselves with almost anything. But what I have learned in 2020 especially, but as I've been learning it for years, is that for me, if there's something that's triggering me, I'm like, yes, thank you, and I walk through the fire. And this is
Yeah.
how I said it in the beginning, is like, as soon as I know that there's something there that I need to heal within myself, like I will put everything else aside and I will walk through that fire. I will feel everything I need to feel the best that I can, because like I'm still human and I'm still going to have some kind of resistance. And sometimes
Right.
I can't see things on my own. And sometimes I need to talk to people and have them help me see, help show me what's going on
Right.
for me. But then it's like, I will do whatever it takes to walk through that fire, as long as it's in my awareness. And of course, me always trying to see what is really going on with things and paying attention to anything that's triggering within me. But there's a lot of people who just aren't really ready to do that. And I agree that there's going to be some really physical things that are going to happen, that may have to happen in order for people to really be honest with themselves about what's going on.
Yeah, and we're not talking like political issues or even within the social system. It's more about ourselves and what's really going on, what's being reflected back to us personally. Even Mother Nature is reflecting back to us what is actually not working with humanity as a collective energy. Because we're always like the natural system is always trying to stay in balance. So if we see nature getting out of balance, and the more extreme it becomes, the more we can know that humanity as a collective is totally out of balance, and nature is just responding equally to it to still be somehow able to create a balance within the systems. And if we don't like it, we probably should take a deeper look at, where am I responsible for that personally? But then again, especially when people are in fear mode, when people are panicking or afraid that they would lose everything, if it's their health, if it's their house, if it's their necessities, when you're in that fear mode, you do whatever you need to do to survive, even if that means you have to kill your neighbor for it. And that is the very danger that we're moving toward as humanity, because we're being played in such a profound way, and not in a good way, but in a very eye-opening way, that humanity itself, like the general population, isn't even noticing that they're being played against each other. And that is the danger. That is really the danger, especially when it comes to extremes, extreme responses, just because you feel you have to save yourself and someone might take whatever you have. The minute you're so honest with yourself and where you're at in life, what you're attracting into your life, what is being reflected back to you, also stepping beyond that understanding that we are physical beings and that what we have matters. I mean, even the Bible talks about it, that the material things you will never be able to take with you, right? Um, but if we really want to create kingdom or God's kingdom on earth, like literally the Christ consciousness, not just, from a traditional Christian perspective, but the Christ consciousness, the universal consciousness of oneness, we have to let go of the material things as experiencing them as that truth.
Yeah.
um our soul, our being is all energy, and you cannot erase energy. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to convey as well with his life, saying my physical body doesn't matter. That's not who you are. They can hang me on a cross, they can beat me up. It doesn't matter my understanding and who I am and how I experience oneness with all there is, which people call God, universe, those universal consciousness, that we're more than just our physical being. And when we can let go of that fear of having to defend ourselves, the fear of someone could do something to us, then that's when we're ready to create communities that actually matter. Because in that moment, you also understand that communities within this physical world need some set of guidelines. Like
Some
if
structure.
someone lives in a community and says, but I want to have this big house on this property, and someone says, well, hold on, but I thought we're equally sharing that, and so your house would go onto my property. And then like, well, no, like you just have to respect how I would like to live so that I can respect how you would like to live. That doesn't work either. Like it has to be a balance. Again, we're talking about, that's why we learn so fabulously from nature, where everything is in balance, on an essence basis, right? So when you get to that point where you really feel the sense of the essence of oneness, you live in a way that you can be radically honest with yourself for the most part, that you can shift in the moment. Like not everything has to be a struggle. Sometimes it's just a realization, a noticing to be able to let it go, right? um, but then also you understand it's not just the responsibility that you have for yourself and to yourself, but that same responsibility is extended to the people that you're with in this community. So if something is off balance within a community, understand that there is a discrepancy between the responsibility that you feel toward yourself and the responsibility that you feel toward others. There should not be a difference, because we are one. Who you are because I am because you are. And that is the key understanding when we stop fighting for what we think is right, but instead respond. And that doesn't mean we all have to have the same opinion about things or have to think the same way, but there's just an essential um, level, essential foundation of what we can operate. And I think especially within the spiritual world, that essential, that foundation, that basic is truly based on love. If I can respond to something from a place of love and can convey my opinion with love and yet respect um, someone else, as long as they're, respecting that same of me, you can establish a foundation that despite different opinions, you can live harmoniously together in a community um, that is established on respect, trust, love, and kindness.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's interesting because when you were talking about how the things that we have don't really matter, there was a few months ago that I was really going deep into meditation, I would come out of my meditation each day and I would literally want to get rid of everything. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want anything in this house anymore. I want it to be like empty.
My husband is not happy with me. He's like, did you just throw that away too? Like, well, I didn't need it. I don't know, it was just sitting there. They love to go metal detecting, and I call that trash hunting, and I hate trash. And I'm like, well, it's it's treasure, it's history, and we clean up the earth too. I'm like, I can give him that much, but um, I I rather sit in an empty room than have
Too much stuff.
clutter.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'm in the process of getting ready to move, and I'm going through things. And I've been going through things most of the year already and getting rid of stuff consistently.
Mm.
But I'm going through things now to prepare to move into a much smaller place. And I'm like, the only things that I really want to hang on to besides the necessities of clothing is some of my books and my plants. Everything else, I'm like, I don't really care about.
Yes, we just talked about the same thing. The same thing. There's really not like our neighbor's house burned down. And that was not fun. I guess they had a kitchen fire. Like it was not direct neighbor, but across the pond. And I said to my husband, like, what would I take if our house would burn? And I had to be real honest. I think it would be my phone and my computer. Because all the stuff that is important, like documents, are in a fireproof safe. So I wouldn't worry about that at that point. But there's just for one, there's a lot of information on my computer that I want access to, from books to personal pictures, to the connections that I have with a lot of people, or phone. Like if I be honest, if I wouldn't have that, a lot of people that I'm friends with, I wouldn't have connections with. But other than that, there's really not that much where I would say this would be something. I mean, except for my family and my dog, of course, so that's like a given, right? But of material things, there's really not much where I would say this definitely has to go with me. And even with everything being now online, like it's not actually stored on your computer. I'm having an interview. Go. Oh, that's what you get when you're mom. They show up in your interviews. And he knew, actually. So I'm surprised he usually never comes in when the door's closed, but it's Friday night, so he didn't expect that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so even, if it would be really drastic, I knew that I could still find people through whatever, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of that is stored somewhere out there. A lot of pictures, it's like, oh, let me just go to Instagram. They're still all there.
Yep. Yeah. That is,
So
yeah.
really, despite that, there is really not much that I would be worried about taking. I'm not attached to any of it.
And I think that's what kind of naturally starts to happen when we start to feel that oneness and that
Yeah.
connection to everything. We know that everything we need is always there, and we always have that connection. It's not the connection through our things. I will say that my grandmother, she recently passed away, and I do have some of an attachment to some of her things because I know that it's just because like probably before too long I won't really feel that attachment too much because I'm developing my connection with her in the spirit world. But right now, it's like still my connection to her, and I do speak to her and have, it's just, I still have an attachment to her things. But other than that, my things, even the china my other grandmother had given me, I was like, I really don't have any sort of attachment to this. And I almost thought something was wrong with me at first. I'm like, this should be like really precious. It's been passed down for generations. And I almost feel like giving it back to her. And that, like, she would probably be really hurt if I did that.
Right.
But like, I don't feel any sort of connection to it. But it's a freeing feeling, right? We all want to feel like that's freedom. And when we're not attached to a bunch of stuff, then we have a lot more space for the things that actually matter.
And you can build communities without that baggage.
Yes.
That's where it becomes just almost like it's almost like you're going back to Garden Eden. Like at that point, I know people always think like, well, you grew up in East Germany, so you all have the nude beaches. That's fine. But you, even at that point, you no longer even feel ashamed for your body, or you don't feel like you have to hide yourself. It is truly profound. Like, I never even thought of it until we just now talked about it. But um, you almost don't feel even ashamed for the physical. Like, I don't know. And maybe that really does go back to what the Bible even talks about, to Garden Eden. I don't know if this place really ever existed, or if it's really a metaphor for that pureness of existence, where it didn't matter what you have, how much you have, because you always knew you're provided for, where people weren't looking at you just because you had a few pounds more or a few pounds less or a different skin color. It was just that you were just so connected. So maybe that truly is the metaphor of what we're going back to when we talk about our spiritual journey and letting go of the baggages that we have been carrying around. And I think our generation has now this huge advantage that even scientifically we can prove some of the things that we intuitively already knew when it comes to trauma work, when it comes to experiences that have been added on from generation to generation to generation. And I think our generation now is the ones who are ready to implement that knowledge that we have been able to gain scientifically, spiritually, to heal and to get back to Garden Eden.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I talk about the new earth fairly often on here, and about, we all interpret it, however we interpret it, but
Right.
it is, so similar to what you're saying. And that power that we need to remember that we have in the creation of that as well.
Yeah.
We give so much of our power away to external things that are happening, but when we really come back to ourselves and we remember that creative power that we actually have in the creation of this world. And I think it's that it comes back to that self-responsibility, that responsibility for self-awareness, and really knowing what is really true and what isn't true, what is really just a trigger, that something that needs to be healed within us. But yeah. So I'm noticing that our time, like, we've been talking way longer than we were planning to talk, which
Oh yeah.
we probably
Good conversations.
we knew that it would probably, I was like, I'm not sure if I can cut it short, so I just kind of let it go. But this was a really great conversation. I'm so glad that you were able to come on today and that we were able to do this. And do you want to tell everybody where they can find your film?
Oh yes. See, we almost forgot about that one. Yes, it's actually quite simple. Everything is available on the website, thepowerofconnection.net. .com was already taken, so we took net. .net, thepowerofconnection.net, where there's literally everything available, from director's statement to watching it, actually, the screening, to press release and all the fun stuff and updates. Yeah.
I'll post the link below as well, so everybody can.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for joining today. And everybody else who's watching, remember to leave a comment. Let us know that you watched. Give the video a thumbs up. And I will leave links to find both of us online so that you can check out our stuff. And yeah, we will see you guys I will see you guys on the next video. Maybe Isabel will come on again in the future, but that would be awesome. I'm sure we'll have
I'd love to.
plenty more to talk about. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching today, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.